If it's Wednesday, taking on Trump or not, 2024 candidates, Republican leaders, and the current president are all struggling to meet this moment and address the state of U.S. democracy in the aftermath of Donald Trump's fourth criminal indictment. Plus, new developments in this ongoing legal fight over access to a widely used abortion pill. An appeals court has just partially ruled in favor of abortion rights opponents, as the issue is now on track to go back to the Supreme Court in a campaign year. And for the first time, a court in the U.S. has declared it a constitutional duty for government officials to protect their citizens from the climate. What the landmark ruling out of Montana could mean for climate change litigation and fossil fuel policies nationwide. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting from Washington. And right now, more than 2 days since former President Trump's fourth criminal indictment brought the total number of criminal counts he's facing to 91, there is no sugarcoating it. The top political leaders in this country are struggling to meet the gravity of this moment and fill the vacuum in moral leadership in our fraying democracy. The response from Mr. Trump's so-called Republican rivals isn't surprising, but is once again revealing. The most recent comments from Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott, and Vivek Ramaswamy, three of the candidates closest to Trump in the polls, could have come from Trump's own mouth, lumping the latest serious charges with the prior ones, glossing over the details of the cases, and essentially coming to the former president's defense.
We see the legal system being weaponized against political opponents. That is un-American and unacceptable. At the end of the day, we need a better system than that.
They're now doing an inordinate amount of resources to try to shoehorn this contest over the 2020 election into a RICO statute. I think it's an example of this criminalization of politics.
The fourth one does not appear to be pardonable if it's brought under state charges. But wherever possible, I would pardon him because I want to move this nation forward beyond this weaponization of government.
So this morning, Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence also parroted Trump's talking points about the politicization in the American legal system, but he also firmly said that Donald Trump lost Georgia and criticized Trump's efforts on January 6th. Take a listen.
After years of revelations of politicization at the highest levels of our justice system in this country, has undermined public confidence in equal treatment under the law. But in these times, I want to say I think it's important that we hew to first principles. No one is above the law. And the president and all those implicated are entitled to the presumption of innocence that every American enjoys. Despite what the former president and his allies have said for now more than 2.5 years, and continue to insist to this very hour, the Georgia election was not stolen, and I had no right to overturn the election on January 6th.
These various responses, from the defensive to the tepid, arguably reflect years of rhetoric fed to voters by Mr. Trump and his allies all over the spectrum, including in the information ecosystem. On the Republican side, the closest we've seen to someone in leadership actually speak out about the former president's behavior comes from Georgia's governor, Brian Kemp, who posted this yesterday very declaratively. The 2020 election in Georgia was not stolen. The future of our country is at stake in 2024, and that must be our focus. Kemp has also been one of the few Republicans not to attack the Fulton County DA's office. But again, Kemp is the exception in his party. And then there's President Biden, the leader of this country, and potentially Trump's 2024 rival for the White House. President Biden is largely staying on the sidelines. It's a marked difference from his 2020 campaign, which was built on restoring the soul of the nation and restoring norms to American politics. Now, to be fair, it is no easy task to say what all of these politicians could or should realistically do in this toxic political environment to meet this moment. But what's happening now clearly isn't cutting it. I understand the political necessity here for certain people not to speak out. But when you're the leader of the country, you got to try to meet the moment. And political leaders on every level are not meeting this moment. So guess what? It's going to come down to everybody else, the voters. Vaughn Hillier joins me now for the latest from Trump world. So, Vaughn, It is fascinating how they control this media environment for the next 10 days. They get to decide when to have their arraignment, right? They get to decide whether or not to show up for a debate. This is exactly the way Donald Trump likes to operate, where everybody is waiting for him to act here. Are you seeing that kind of confidence in them right now?
Yeah, and it reminds me, the way that things don't change from indictment 1, 2, 3, and 4. It was after indictment number 2 that night in Bedminster when he had sort of a makeshift rally in front of his private club there. And an aide to his told me, every second that, the Republican voters are talking about Donald Trump and his legal conundrums is a second they're not talking about Ron DeSantis or anybody else in the Republican field. And frankly, that is the truth and very well could be the case next week if they, in fact, do decide to come down here to Atlanta, head into this jail behind me on the morning of Wednesday, August 23rd. At that point, it's going to be up to the other Republican candidates on stage. And Martha McCollum even saw her own comments here today, who will be one of the moderators in that debate on Fox, suggesting that it is imperative that they respond directly to the charges filed against him. As you just played a couple of them there, there's little reason to believe that any of them outside of a Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, Will Hurd if he qualifies. And Asa Hutchinson, I don't believe is qualified either at this point, so maybe just Chris Christie will actually distinguish themselves in a meaningful manner from Donald Trump. And it's hard to reckon with the dynamics of this race changing over the next 5 months, knowing that we're heading full steam ahead towards trial dates.
Well, good. I can ask you a question while the train goes by. The issue of this Monday event that the former president has promised, how involved are his Georgia lawyers in this? Is this something they really did, or is this rhetoric? Is it sort of like, I hold in my hand is this sort of a McCarthy era thing, or did they actually hire somebody to put together a report?
I have zero reason to believe that his Georgia counsel is a part of the making of this so-called report that he intends to introduce on Monday here. His counsel, notably one of the lead attorney here, is somebody who had made past public comments and social media posts that were very much anti the president's actions in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And he said that he is helping Donald Trump on the grounds of that every individual deserves a right to a defense, and that here in Georgia, that this is taking up a great number of resources. As for the actual making of this report, I don't know what it is ultimately going to look like here, but we have heard Donald Trump talk about fraudulent claims in Georgia now for 3+ years. And frankly, every time that he has suggested he's going to reveal something new, he has yet to do it. So not to wiggle around your question here, but I have no idea what Donald Trump is going to come up with this time.
By the way, we all are in this boat with him, and we certainly aren't going to cover what he does live, considering the fact that he can just sort of make stuff up on the fly here. We know Mark Meadows' lawyer has filed a motion to try to get Atlanta moved to federal court, to the feds. We assume Trump will ask for this too. What do you know about that?
Right. Again, we're waiting to see what sort of motions the Donald Trump's counsel here in Georgia make. They've been very quiet outside of the direct statements that they have released, including on the night of the indictment, in which they said this was an unconstitutional process that led to the indictment of Donald Trump. But the expectation is that there is waiting to see which way the motion filed by Mark Meadows goes here. And in so many ways, it's hard to see March 4th trial date actually taking place at this point, because of the fact you're dealing with 19 defendants. And also the reality is that somebody like a Jenna Ellis, who is sort of the right-hand lawyer to Rudy Giuliani, she is somebody who is very much out on her own. She is not supporting Trump in the 2024 campaign. She has been ridiculed on MAGA Online. And, Jenna Ellis is somebody who has already said in legal filings in the state of Colorado that she misrepresented her past statements that the election was stolen here in Georgia. So these are not all 19 defendants that are on one ship together necessarily. There's very much dividing interests here among them.
Yeah, I have a feeling that once the parade of arraignments ends, the Georgia case might be a lot of motions for a while before we actually get motion to an actual trial. Anyway, Vaughn Hilliard on the ground for us in Atlanta. Vaughn, thank you. So for more, let's bring in our pretty smart panel for the day. That's a very smart panel. Washington Post congressional reporter Mariana Sotomayor, Naveen Nayak, President and Executive Director for the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Republican strategist Brad Todd. So I'm going to open a conversation here that I bet you all have had with your own staffs, your own news editors, your own, which is anybody going to lead us out of this mess? And I say this way, Mariana. Look, we are in and I understand the individual decisions of everybody making decisions based on their own needs politically, whether you're running against Donald Trump and want to win primary voters, whether you're Joe Biden and don't want to create a Hunter Biden situation. But my God, the country is on the edge of a cliff. Who's in charge? Who's leading us?
That is a question to your point. Yeah, we're all trying to figure out who that person is. I remember covering Biden during the last election. I mean, this was a huge part of what he would talk about all the time, restoring the soul of the nation, restoring trust in politicians, in government, in the faith of this country. And he's been missing in that. And I think there's been a lot of questions as to why. I think part of it is he doesn't want to necessarily talk about the Justice Department when his own son is under investigation. He also was pretty adamant in saying, when he was, I think, president-elect, he would often say, listen, I do not want to talk about the Department of Justice because I don't want to be seen as someone who is colluding with the DOJ, which is something that, of course, many people who were critical of Trump would say that he was also doing. So he right now is at this point where maybe he should go out there and start to say, look, Republicans are very much undermining the justice system, a pillar of democracy. Right. A lot of people behind the scenes often talk about how dangerous that is. And the fact that there isn't anyone, we're definitely not hearing it from Republicans, and you don't have necessarily high Democratic leaders to be filling that void.
Naveen, what would you stay? I mean, I understand the political reasoning not to get involved.
First of all, I think there's two different elements to this. One is the cancer in the Republican Party? And it is very hard. I think President Biden will have his moment. We are going to have a campaign in 2024. And there's no question that, I mean, it was at the core of his launch advertisement. The threat to democracy remains strong. MAGA Republicans and Donald Trump are at the core of that threat. There's no question that President Biden will make that case. That's a political case. I think he's being really smart that the legal case has got to be made through the Department of Justice. The political case, he's president. He's out there touting the economic accomplishments he's made. He's focused on inflation. He's focused on a whole suite of things. I think the political argument on this will come. And it's really hard for us as a country, your core question, to move forward if we don't deal with this in the Republican Party.
I get that.
Wait a minute.
But let me, I'm just curious. I do want to try to, we are at a moment and nobody is trusted to lead us out of it. Certainly not Donald Trump or Joe Biden.
All institutions are in ill repute right now. Journalism's in ill repute. The law's in ill repute. The Catholic Church is in ill repute. You can name a big institution, and it's in ill repute in the country. It's not a time of trust. I think Joe Biden does bear some responsibility to that because he said he was going to bring us together. That was his number one priority. Then he's governed as a complete partisan. And let's don't let him say that he's offended by a White House that cooperates with the DOJ. After all, he was vice president when Eric Holder said he was Barack Obama's wingman, hardly an independent actor. So we don't need to let that pass.
All right, but let me ask you this. And it goes, we are in a situation where nobody in the Republican Party who's got skin in the game thinks it's a good idea to nominate Donald Trump. And yet there's a whole bunch of people it looks like it's inevitable. There's a lot of people in the Democratic Party that think, boy, it's not a good idea to nominate an 80-year-old guy for a second term. But it feels like inevitable. Look at the other thing you and I talk about all the time professionally, the world of college sports. Not a single person in charge of college sports thinks this college realignment is healthy for college sports. And what's happening? It's happening anyway. This is why I think we feel so frustrated and leaderless as a nation.
Well, it's certainly a polarized time on many fronts in the United States. And we all live on our smartphones every day. We all can be completely
we individually know what the right thing to do is and collectively act like idiots, Naveen.
Yeah, I guess here's the part that I find is a talking point as opposed to truth. We actually have seen 2 years of the most bipartisan accomplishments in my 20 years in D.C.
You weren't paying attention then. You weren't paying attention when Ted Kennedy and George Bush.
Gun violence.
30 years ago now.
In the last 20 years.
It's 25 years ago.
Gun violence, on gay marriage, on manufacturing chips,
Are you attacking the partisanship of Barack Obama? Is that what you're doing?
My point is Joe Biden has been unbelievably successful, and the idea that it's not
Joe Biden's
fair, Brad, to say
to be bipartisan, you have to do something that's important to the other side.
Let me go to the other point on the Republican side, which is where, again, we know what the case is against Donald Trump. This isn't like some situation where we're all in the dark and the prosecutors got some sort of secret tape that we haven't heard. We know he called and pressured lawmakers. We know they set up fake electors to steal election. Why can't that alone be enough for more leaders in the Republican Party?
The American people don't believe you should weaponize the criminal justice system against your political opponent. Full stop. Full stop.
So you don't think there are...
I'm telling you, the American public does not believe you should weaponize the justice.
Well, that's not
That's
true.
what you're asking for.
Well, of course that, but I mean, majority of this country thinks if he's convicted of a felony that Trump shouldn't run.
Well, I can tell you, though, that whether he should run or not, some of those feelings are about other things about Donald Trump. But this question remains, should you be able to prosecute your political opponent? Should partisan elected officials be prosecuting the other party in the middle of an election? The answer is no.
Well, the problem
is anyone above the law.
Right. The problem is, Mariana, this is the frustration of all things Donald Trump. He's been doing this to the law since he was an adult. Okay, literally 20 years old with what he did with the federal judge. I mean, he dares everybody. Look, he made the Justice Department go through a subpoena for the classified documents because he wasn't playing by the same set of rules that everybody else was willing to play by. He always pushes the envelope more, forces people going, because, Brad, I do think generally you're right. I think most people are going, the last thing anybody wants to do is have this. But then he does, well, I'm going to push it even further and let's see what happens. Yeah. He sort of dares you to punish him.
Yeah, and I think he's also really capitalized on the fact that he does have a base, to your point, that is really skeptical of government. They very much see this because of what Trump has been saying for a long time, that, yeah, there, as McCarthy says, every second and every chance he gets, that there is a two-tier justice system. And Trump's message has and will continue to be, look, they're coming after me, because if they're not coming after me, they're going to come after you. And that is something that has very much mobilized his base. I don't know if that's a general election winning message.
It's not. I mean, look at these numbers here. The disconnect between Democrats, independents, and then the Republican Party on this is amazing. Look at these numbers. Should Trump face criminal charges for trying to overturn the election? A majority, 95-5 among Democrats, 57-37 among independents, which to me is the more important number there, and then it's 12-85 among Republicans. This is an unwinnable political situation, Brad, for the GOP.
Well,
I mean, it just is.
We'll end up having a choice, though. We'll end up having a choice between Donald Trump, with all the questions that voters have about him, and Joe Biden's failed record on the economy. That's going to be a pretty... And whether he's fit to lead the country for 4 more years at his age. That's going to be a real question. They're identical in your poll. NBC News poll shows...
It's been identical in all these polls. They're unfavorable ratings.
Right. So
it's become the one and the same. I mean, Naveen, I look at this. Joe Biden is no longer... Donald Trump successfully turned Biden's last name into Clinton. Because if you look at Biden's numbers, they look like Hillary 16, not Biden 2020.
I think there's a big difference there, though, is that you still see Biden's favorability, not his job approval, very different, right? Hillary Clinton in 2016, the dislike of Hillary Clinton, unfortunately, was much higher.
Naveen, I'd love to see that poll. It doesn't exist anymore. It used to be that way.
Right.
I don't see that anymore.
No, what I mean is there's not this deep, intense dislike of the man. They actually think that he is trying hard, that there's a lot of
I hear you, but look at how House Republicans have successfully weaponized the Biden brand.
Yeah, no, they totally have. And even if you are talking about the legislative achievements, people have no idea. Like, polling has also showed that people don't know what the Inflation Reduction Act is or does or CHIPS. And House Democrats right now are very much trying to figure out with the DCCC, how are we going to talk about this if people legitimately have no idea?
Because they don't have a president who does it.
They don't think he's competent. They don't think he's competent to lead the country or be in charge of the economy.
I've thought about this prescription drug thing. Yeah. Naveen, if Donald Trump did this, he'd say it every other second. I lowered your prescription drugs, by the way. I hate this justice system. But I lowered your prescription drugs, right? Yeah. That's not in Joe Biden's wheelhouse.
And it's also why he's president, to be honest. I think there's an element of Trump's bombastic lie, say whatever, that I think is why, big reason why he's not president. I think there is
But look what he said. But look at his, frankly, incorrect rhetoric about the economy.
Sure,
he's convinced people that
a
his economy was
salesman.
better than this one, and it's just not true. I lived it. We all lived it. It wasn't true.
Yes, he's a salesman. I mean,
yeah, he's a good one.
He's a snake oil salesman.
Well, it still remains to be seen if he ends up being the Republican nominee or what. But he
What do you put the odds at?
He lost to a much more popular Joe Biden than Joe Biden is now by a few thousand votes.
But here are the big things. The last time Donald Trump was on the ballot, January 6th hadn't happened. Abortion was still a right in this country. Yeah. So I think we have to remember who.
And Mariana, I think as we joke, it may be abortion stupid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It
really could come down to that.
And speaking of that, we're going to discuss that in a minute. This was lively. Thank you. I knew it would be a good one. Coming up, we're going to dig deeper into the new legal push from Trump's now indicted former chief of staff to move the Fulton County trial to federal court as DA Fani Willis moves towards a trial date in the thick of the 2024 primaries. That's ahead, but first, what today's new abortion ruling means for access to one of the nation's most widely used abortion medications. More importantly, what does it mean for the Supreme Court schedule and when we'd hear this ruling? That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Let's turn now to some breaking news from this afternoon. A 3-judge panel from the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals this afternoon upheld part of a decision that rolled back some access to the abortion pill mifepristone. However, the drug's going to remain on the market for now, thanks to a Supreme Court ruling earlier this year, allowing it to remain available as these cases make their way through the appeals process, which means even this ruling doesn't end things. If you're confused, that's why I have our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett, here. So, Laura, it's a little bit confusing, but sort of walk us through what happened today and why it kind of has zero impact.
So the upshot is that nothing changes for now. If you still want to get access to mifepristone, it is as if nothing happened. And as you said, Chuck, that's because of the Supreme Court decision. What this does, though, is it tees up the Supreme Court to wade back into this issue, and it could happen pretty quickly. Because what the Fifth Circuit has done, which is the intermediate appellate court, before you get to the Supreme Court, you have to go district court, appellate court, Supreme Court. By the Fifth Circuit doing this, it tees up what the Supreme Court is actually going to look at. And what they're going to look at is how the FDA, starting in around 2016, loosened the access, loosened the restrictions on this drug so that you could get it by mail, so that you wouldn't have to go to a doctor's office. You could take it further into a pregnancy. All those things that the FDA did to make it easier to get the drug is now what's being challenged, not the original approval of the drug, but the loosening of restrictions is now what SCOTUS is going to have to take up when the Justice Department appeals this.
Okay, so let's narrow this down. So let's assume the Supreme Court upholds. So does it roll back everything to pre-16? So mifepristone is still it's still available, but you have the hurdles are back.
Yes, and so it takes us back to an older regime. And so the people who challenge us have said, well, how could that be a problem? You know, you operated for several years like that without being able to get it in the mail, so how can you complain? What the drug manufacturers and the Biden administration will tell you is by reverting back in time, you actually change the labeling. And when you change the labeling, that disrupts the entire marketplace and means that the drug will have to be taken off the market for a little bit of time. And so there's a little bit of disagreement on just the regulations here. And so that's why this matters. Even though the practical impact is not going to change anything for anyone today, what this does is tease up a fight later on.
Laura, is the fact that we've gone 7 years with this new FDA regime, if you will, right? And it's sort of, at what point do you say, hey, obviously this didn't present any problems. We don't have any major medical problems here. We don't have any. Does that matter at all?
Well, it would if it was going to trial, right? All of that evidence would come in, all of the safety assessments that the FDA has put forth, that they've filed all this paper about would come in, and then the doctors and the other people who have filed suit would present their evidence to, they have anecdotal evidence of things happening in emergency rooms, right? They'd get to put their evidence, and then eventually a judge or a jury would decide. But again, this is headed straight to the Supreme Court, and they could take it up whenever they want, and I imagine they will take it up for next term, even though they're currently out of session right now.
Wait a minute. The Supreme Court's going to rule out something without ever seeing the basic evidence of the last 7 years?
They're going to see the evidence, but it's going to happen before a trial. And that's part of what the Justice Department has been arguing.
That's a bizarre way to work, isn't it?
Well, it's why they've sort of challenged this thing from the beginning, because remember, it all starts with that federal judge in Texas who decides to block it nationwide without a trial, right? Never had been done before, and that's why the Biden administration was jumping up and down about the decision, but we'll see whether at least 4 justices are willing to take it up. You only need 4 to say yes to taking the case. You need 5 to decide what to do about it.
Yeah, well, I think we know they probably have the 4. Laura Jarrett, boy, thanks for clearing this up and adding to more of the anxiety of where all this is headed. Thank you. After the break, new security concerns for the grand jurors in the aftermath of that sweeping Fulton County indictment of former President Donald Trump, plus some new information on when that trial may begin. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Moments ago, this afternoon, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis proposed a trial date of March 4th, 2024, as former President Trump and his 18 co-defendants face racketeering charges for trying to interfere in the state's 2020 election. The proposed date is a little more than 2 months after special counsel Jack Smith wants Trump to stand trial for election interference. And it's less than 2 months after the Iowa caucuses. Keep in mind, this is just a request. It's not a guarantee, and nearly every legal analyst we've spoken to says it's going to take quite some time for a case this big to actually get to trial. And then once it gets to trial, it's going to take weeks, maybe months to seat a jury. Just ask the folks in Fulton County. All of this comes as Trump's former White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, seeks to move his case to federal court. And he's arguing that a federal law gives him that right because the actions in question are tied to his time as a federal official while he was serving in the White House. His attorney says he also intends to file a motion to dismiss the indictment as soon as is feasible. Meadows' filing brings to light one of several challenges Fulton County DA Fani Willis will face as she brings RICO charges, typically used against gangs or mobs, against Trump and his allies. Those challenges include not only the nature of the charges filed, but also the logistics of potentially trying 19 defendants in one trial. For more to unpack this, as somebody who's very familiar with the system in Fulton County, joined by Darryl Cohen. He has served as an assistant district attorney in Fulton County. Mr. Cohen, I appreciate this, and essentially you're here to teach us the Fulton County system here a little bit. So first let's talk about this federal law here. If you were Fani Willis, would you be nervous about this motion?
I would not at all be nervous because she's going to have this being motion number 1 out of many, many motions. They'll be so numerous, we'll not be able to count them. Do I expect more of this moving it to federal court, where if it does move to federal court, there's going to be a more liberal jury pool? I expect it, but I don't expect that it's going to move. And no, I would not be at all nervous. And by the way, call me Darryl, Chuck, if you don't
got
mind.
it. Well, Darryl, I will say this. On its face, Mark Meadows' attorney makes a pretty, this, and in fact, he's not an unindicted co-conspirator in the federal case, and there may be separate reasons for that, but there is a simultaneous federal case. Is there any way that the Jack Smith case and the Atlanta case interfere with each other?
I don't think they interfere with each other. I think there's a tremendous amount of crossover between the 2 cases. But if Jack Smith case is tried first, assuming it goes to trial, or if the Fulton County case is tried first, assuming it goes to trial, and there's a guilty verdict in either one of them, then there's going to be a scream and a hue and cry saying double jeopardy, double jeopardy. And by the way, did I say double jeopardy?
So what happens? And it's an interesting, look, all of the legal experts we've talked to, and you tell me why they're wrong, indicate that the Fulton County case is likely to get motioned all the way past November of 2024. Tell me why we would be wrong, why the experts are wrong about that prediction.
Oh, I think they're right.
Okay.
I think there's no chance that this case is going to be tried. If it's tried, I don't think there's any chance it's going to be tried before the election in 2024. Obviously, it could. And sometimes when it can't happen, it does, and it's never good. But I don't anticipate this happening. There are too many defendants, too many lawyers. We know we have at least 19 lawyers. Yeah. And we know that there's going to be motion after motion. Each lawyer is going to be concerned with his or her client and the heck of the rest of the people. We don't care. We care about our client. And also, I think Fani's looking for some people to roll over, of course, and testify.
I think that seems to be where she's headed with some of this. And obviously, the unindicted co-conspirators are part of the Jack Smith plan, too, it sounds like, in a similar vein there. So it's funny you brought up the double jeopardy issue. The Jack Smith election interference case is likely to go to trial before the Atlanta case. If he gets a guilty verdict, could you see her dropping Trump from the charges?
I could see her perhaps dropping Trump, but I don't think she would do it willingly. I think that Trump's lawyers and all the other lawyers representing the co-defendants would file the appropriate motions before the Superior Court judge, who, by the way, is brand new. And this is not only a case of first impression for all of us, but certainly for him.
When it comes to trying this as a RICO case, I look at the case against Giuliani and the witness intimidation. You look at the case of breaking into Coffee County. Those seem ironclad. But if you put it all in the same case, do you risk not getting a conviction on those specific incidents or not?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to remember that RICO gives Fani, the DA's office, the opportunity to bring things to Fulton County that took place throughout the state of Georgia outside of Fulton County. So that's number one. But you also have to convince a jury of 12 men and women who are well-meaning but don't know the law that all of these crimes, if they were crimes, are part of an overall conspiracy, making it racketeering. Not easy, because you're going to have people, whether we like it or not, it's going to be very political. You're going to have Democrats who hate Trump. I don't care what the evidence is, he's guilty. You're going to have Republicans, probably one or two, no matter what the evidence is, he's not guilty. So Fani, the DA's office, has got a tremendous burden that they're going to have to overcome using RICO. And RICO's not easy, even if there's no politics, because some of these acts are not necessarily criminal.
Which gets me back to me, there's a simple, you could have simplified this, and I don't want to read into your tone, but it sounds to me like you think you might not have gone the RICO route.
You can read completely into my tone. I believe in the KISS method. Keep it short, stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. And you have to realize these jurors, whoever they are, regardless of what their education or lack is, they're not going to be veterans of the criminal system. So my view is to look up to jurors, but simplify it, not dumb it down, but simplify.
So would you have done separate indictments? Because you could easily see, right? Donald Trump's on tape threatening Raffensperger with a criminal investigation if he remains president. You've got an actual, essentially, bank robbery, if you will, or the akin of, with voter fraud with the Coffee County. You've got the intimidation of Ruby Freeman. You have distinct incidents that seem pretty easy for the public to see. Would you have done it separately that way?
What I would have done is I would have taken every case, every crime that took place in Fulton County, and made it a separate indictment or a separate count. And the other charges that took place, for instance, in Coffee County, I would use that as a similar transaction, showing what took place rather than trying to have a tremendous RICO indictment.
Yeah.
I just like to simplify it in front of a jury. I don't think it helps to complicate it.
Well, the real winners are law school professors who have real life trials to talk about the differences between federal, state, prosecutors in a local jurisdiction. To me, that's the only upside here is law school students and law professors get real life anecdotes to teach their students. Darryl Cohen, really appreciate you giving us a little hint of how things work in Fulton County.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, the search for answers. Hundreds of people are still unaccounted for. There's a planned presidential visit now. We're on the ground with the latest from Maui. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Relief and recovery efforts are ongoing on the Hawaiian island of Maui today. As of last night, officials put the number of dead from last week's devastating wildfires at 106. But because of the nature of the deaths, officials have been able to identify just 5 victims so far, and only 2 of those names have been released to the public. Robert Dykeman and Buddy Jantok, 2 Lahaina residents in their 70s. Officials say they expect the death toll to keep rising as emergency crews make their way through structures in the hardest hit areas. Governor Josh Green said earlier this week that as many as 1,300 people were missing in the aftermath of the fires, but the number of unaccounted for right now is unclear. Meanwhile, there's tensions now growing between some Maui residents and government aid workers. Some locals tell NBC News they are distrustful of the government's aid efforts and choosing to rely on community support instead. Dana Griffin is on the ground for us in Maui for NBC News. I'm also joined by the Hawaii Department of Defense official, Jeff Hickman. Dana, let me start with you. Walk me through here this tension we're sensing between the feds coming in and locals on the ground. I'm sure the delay is probably adding to the distrust because of the logistics, but where's this stemming from?
Well, Chuck, I think it comes from a sense of not knowing who to trust. There have been posts about not signing documents or trusting even FEMA or the Red Cross. But we've also heard reports from some of the locals who say they've tried to help, they've tried to donate, and they've been turned away, or their items have been told that they do not meet the standard, or you know, there's a certain process which they consider a little corporate for Maui, which is very grassroots. Here, ohana means family. It doesn't matter if you're blood or not. People just want to help each other, so they don't like having to cross that red tape and wait. They wanted this road open behind me days ago, and it's taking just now for it to be officially open for everyone. Last night, residents, workers, and first responders got to go in, and this means a lot of access for people who have been trying to come in and bring supplies to help people that are impacted in Lahaina and even beyond, because there are still towns in West Maui beyond that. People were either trapped or they couldn't get back home. So the governor said he heard these people loud and clear because he had been visiting some of the survivors in their now hotel rooms, and he realized that this was something that the people wanted, and he granted them that. Chuck?
Let me ask you this. The unaccounted for residents on the island, anywhere from 1,000 to 1,300, do you have any sense of whether they have a good handle on the missing and what's being done to try to figure this out, to try to solve this puzzle?
Well, that question remains to be unseen. As media, we have not been allowed into the disaster zone for various reasons, to respect the people who have lost their lives. And also, it's very hazardous and dangerous because of the toxic chemicals that are going around. People think that there could be hundreds, as you mentioned, up to 1,000 plus still missing. Only about 27% of that decimated area has actually been searched. The governor says he anticipates they could get up to 85% searched by the weekend. So I think if we get to the weekend and we see that much progress, that may give people a sense that, okay, they are doing this the right way. But, you know, the governor and rescue workers have also tried to remind people that this is a very slow, methodical process, because not only are they dealing with health hazards, they are dealing with bodies that are clumped together, people who died literally holding on to one another. And those bodies are so delicate, they want to be very respectful, and they have to identify them. And Chuck, there are a lot of kids involved here, and the governor even said he can tell that they're children because their bodies are just so small.
Yeah, no, it's the future. The near-term future here may be very, very grim as more news comes in. Dana Griffin on the ground for us. Dana, thank you. Let me turn to Jeff Hickman with Hawaii's Department of Defense, and this is essentially their Homeland Security, your emergency response. It's what you guys call it here. It's not associated with the Pentagon, right? Mr. Hickman?
Correct. Yeah, we're with emergency management, so we really get to work with federal, local, and state agencies.
Let's first talk about this issue of getting your arms around the missing and how hard it has been. Do you give me your sense. Do you have a sense of how many people are unaccounted for?
Our sense is that it's high, and the number is definitely going to go up as far as the deaths in that situation. You know, I was able to speak to a search and rescue member, a soldier from the Hawaii National Guard, who's from that community and is a part of the search and rescue teams. And the process that they go through, you know, they do a wide search and they listen first for survivors. Then next, they fine-tooth comb over and over. They're working with search dogs. An additional 20 just came in today because finding those and closing the loop on those missing is a priority for Maui County and the state. So with that number 106, and like you said, that number is going to go up. The number of people that we find and identify is also going to go up. The Maui residents can also go to the family assistance centers. There's county, state, and FEMA are also opening up, and they're assisting with DNA swabs and to try to reunify families. American Red Cross has a reunification process on their websites too, and so every effort is being made to.
So you're gathering DNA from survivors in order to help identify potentially victims.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are. We have people on Maui doing that, and we're trying to figure out the process now for family members that are not on the island to get their DNA.
A couple of other questions to see if you have more. There was a video circulating where people think the initial spark happened with a down power line. Is that now the sort of the leading theory of how this began?
It's a leading theory online. The actual what happened, we don't know. The governor and the attorney generals are going to launch a comprehensive review and get to the bottom of it. But right now, we just don't have the capacity to do that and same time meet our priority, which is to help those on Maui.
What is the role the power company is playing right now?
Right now, they're trying to get power back up. I saw a number that 80% of power on that side of the island is being restored. The lieutenant governor is working on relief efforts. They're getting phones and communications into the hands of personnel. I just saw a text a little while ago that our Hawaii National Guard will be assisting the county on watching for any flare-ups that happen as they start up some of the lines again. So every effort is being made to help those affected who still live in the area as well.
Look, and maybe this is all part of the after-action investigation, but the alarm system is something else that I've talked to residents who said they don't remember hearing it. Nobody seems to think it went off. Is this something that you know definitively yet, or is this also part of an after-action investigation that will be launched as soon as search and recovery efforts are done?
Yeah, I think that answer will be found after. I do want to mention that we have the largest siren network in the nation, and we test monthly. And that's the sirens are a lifeline to people, and so we will get to the bottom of that. And the sirens do help a lot of people. We have lava, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and the sirens have been a part of it. This wildfire was a phenomenon. It's the worst in our nation's history, and so that makes it the worst in Hawaii. We've never had one this bad. And with speeds of 60 miles per hour, it's definitely something to contend with.
You're going to have the ear of the president when he gets there Monday, more of the federal government. What advice would you give the feds to try to earn some trust with the locals, right? We're hearing there's some distrust. What advice are you going to give to President Biden and to the federal team to essentially earn the trust of the locals?
Well, I think it's messaging. It's getting the word on where they can go to get the right resources. We have 416 FEMA personnel on the ground. I'm in a room surrounded by FEMA personnel right now. The federal assistance has been amazing and swift. So yeah, right now, I would suggest the messaging, get the word out. We've been countering the false news as well about the rumor control. And so we're hitting social media really hard. And right now we got to hit radio because that seems to be the best way to communicate to Maui. So we would tell the president, communicate, help us communicate that message.
Good reminder to all of our new technology people. Sometimes old technology is the best way to communicate. Good old radio waves. Jeff Hickman from the Hawaii Department of Defense. Good luck out there. Thank you, sir.
Mahalo. Thank you.
Still to come, climate change in the courtroom. A judge in Montana just handed a group of young environmental activists a huge win in a ruling that declares it a constitutional duty to protect people from the climate. What it means, what it doesn't, that's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Climate activists are celebrating a major court victory in Montana that they hope will be a blueprint for future climate change-related litigation. And perhaps it might be the only way to get elected officials to act. Lawyers representing a group of 16 young Montanans, ranging in age from 5 to 22, brought a first-of-its-kind lawsuit against the state, challenging a law that bars agencies from considering environmental impacts when permitting large energy projects. On Monday, a judge in the state ruled that the law violated the constitutional rights of the plaintiffs to a, quote, clean and healthful environment. Spokesperson for the Montana Attorney General called the ruling absurd and a taxpayer-funded publicity stunt, adding that their office will appeal the decision. But if the ruling does stand, it could set a significant legal precedent for other states with similar climate change-related lawsuits, hold states accountable for climate policies. And frankly, you can hear it now. Elected officials don't want to have to do these things, but if they're court-ordered to, maybe they will. Joining me now is Michael Girard. He's founder of the Sabine Center for Climate Change Law at the Columbia Law School. Mr. Girard, welcome to Meet the Press Now.
Good to be with you.
So let's start first with, okay, you get an initial win. You know this is going to be appealed. What do you think is going to be the hardest part of the appeal here?
The state had earlier asked the Montana Supreme Court to stop the trial. The Supreme Court of Montana unanimously refused to do that. So I think that the odds of this case prevailing at the Supreme Court are pretty decent.
So this is based on violating the state constitution in Montana, not the federal constitution. So is this, to you, in your mind, a blueprint here? Do we start to see a couple of things? One, referendum in states that allow it, that try to add, if they don't have a line in their state constitution to protect the environment, do you put that in there and then litigate from there? Is this where you want to take this next?
There are 5 other states, in addition to Montana, that have environmental rights in their constitutions, and 150 other countries that have environmental rights in their constitutions. What we've seen after each climate case victory is it inspires more cases in the United States and around the world. So I think we'll both have more efforts to adopt constitutional protections in some of the U.S. states, and we'll have more litigation in the U.S. and around the world on these theories.
So what's interesting here, though, is that there's not a metric here, right? So there, essentially, the lawsuit said, hey, you do have to have environmental impact, but that doesn't mean you have to abide by the impact, correct?
That's right. The lawsuit, the state now has an obligation to consider climate change when it makes its energy policy, but it doesn't really have to change its energy policy. If the officials of the state don't care about climate impacts, they can go ahead and do it. That may create other grounds for litigation against the state for decisions that are clearly going to harm the climate.
Well, and then I guess you could easily see how this translates to civil litigation very quickly if the state sort of ignores an environmental impact. I guess you tell me, right?
Well, there are around the world about 2,300 lawsuits that we've counted on climate change. We have a database on them. Some of them seek to impose civil liability on various parties. There are a lot of those cases that are still pending. We don't know the outcome yet, but this kind of case is certainly helpful.
I think about things like tobacco and seatbelts and various, there is actually a long history in this country that we really don't do hard things unless there's a court order.
So there have been about 25 lawsuits that are pending, mostly brought by states and cities against fossil fuel companies. They've been held up on procedural grounds. Some of them are moving forward. There may be further procedures, but time will tell. But one difference here is that, as the Maui catastrophe shows, more and more we're seeing these disasters that may well be related to climate change, and that's having a political as well as a legal impact.
Right. I guess I look at the it's a lot easier as a politician to reluctantly have to, all right, we got to abide by this standard because of a court order versus being comfortable embracing a standard that might raise the price of gas.
And the government of Montana has not been told that it has to move away from fossil fuels, only that it has to think about fossil fuels and their climate impact.
Are you, is the goal here to, you said it is inspired, and in the past, there's inspiring, and then there's, there's fertilizing the ground, if you will. How do you plan on fertilizing the ground? What are the next states where we should expect this action?
There's going to be a trial next year in Hawaii under a lawsuit that was brought a couple of years ago saying that Hawaii's transportation policy was too friendly to cars as opposed to mass transit. Clearly, the Montana case will be looked to by the court in Hawaii. There may be other cases that are brought under similar theories in the U.S. I think we'll see considerably more in other countries. So we've already seen the courts in the Netherlands and Germany and France and Nepal and Brazil and Mexico and other countries direct their governments to do more on climate change. I think we will also see more of that all around the world as the governments consistently do less than is necessary to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, you bring up the Netherlands. If I remember, Royal Dutch Shell Oil, right? They got to, so it in one country could radically change how that company governs itself. Michael Gerard from Columbia Law School, fascinating legal strategy to be paying attention to. Thank you.
Thank you.
We turn now to another story before we go, where legal and political stories are colliding. This one regarding the embattled Congressman George Santos, a former fundraiser for the New York Republican congressman, was indicted today on federal charges alleging that he impersonated a prominent congressional aide while soliciting donations for Santos's campaign. According to the indictment, Sam Mealy used a fake name and email address to trick at least a dozen potential donors. Prosecutors say Mealy sent Santos a letter on September 26 of last year in which he admitted to faking my identity to a big donor, but stated that he was high risk, high reward in everything I do. The indictment does not specify who the high-ranking congressional aide is, but it appears to be a top aide to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. We should point out that George Santos himself is not charged in this latest indictment, although he was charged in federal court in spring with fraud, theft, money laundering, and making false statements. That does it for us this hour. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.